By the time police walked onto that farm, a devastating picture was already beginning to take shape, one that would ultimately confirm the deaths of dozens of women. The full scale of what had happened there would take years to fully understand. 23. And investigators would later believe the real number was higher, possibly much higher. The evidence had been sitting on 60 acres of muddy farmland in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. For 2 decades, it had been hidden in plain sight. Here's what makes this case unlike almost any other in modern criminal history. The disappearances were reported, the families called, community advocates escalated warnings to police for years, and yet Robert William Pickton continued operating his pig farm, hosting parties, slaughtering animals, living quietly on Dominion Avenue, while women kept vanishing from Vancouver's downtown Eastside neighborhood. This is the part nobody talks about. Not just the crimes themselves, but the specific, documented chain of warnings that went unheeded before investigators finally made their move. We need to go back to understand how this happened. The downtown Eastside in Vancouver had, for decades, been one of Canada's most economically marginalized urban neighborhoods. Women working in street-level sex work in that area were among the most vulnerable, many struggling with addiction, many without stable housing, many with fractured connections to official support systems. When they disappeared, reports were often filed late. Follow-up was inconsistent. The pattern was dismissed as transients rather than investigated as crime. Pickton had been on the radar. As early as 1997, a woman escaped his farm and reported a violent assault. She had been stabbed. Pickton was charged. Then the charges were stayed, officially because the Crown deemed the witness unreliable. The case died before it ever truly began. Gone. Just like that. Between 1997 and 2002, the list of missing women from the downtown Eastside grew. Community advocates and organizations like WISH, the Women's Information Safe House, were documenting names, cross-referencing reports, and pushing police to treat the disappearances as connected. Their efforts are part of the documented public record of this case. In 1999, Vancouver Police and the RCMP formed a joint task force, Project Evenhanded, specifically to investigate the missing women. It was understaffed, it moved slowly, and Pickton kept farming. That detail changes everything when you consider what investigators found the moment they finally arrived. In February 2002, police executed a search warrant on the Pickton property, initially for an illegal firearms tip, not a murder investigation. What began as a weapons search became something else entirely within hours. DNA evidence, personal belongings, items belonging to missing women. The farm was immediately designated a crime scene of historic proportions. The forensic excavation that followed was an enormous undertaking, stretching across multiple years and consuming vast investigative resources, ultimately becoming the largest and most expensive crime scene investigation in Canadian history. Remains, or DNA, from 33 women were ultimately identified on the property. Pickton was ultimately charged with more than 24 counts of first-degree murder. He was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder in December 2007 and sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. But the conviction was not the end of the story. A British Columbia Missing Women Commission of Inquiry was established and ran from 2010 to 2012. Commissioner Wally Opal's final report was direct and unflinching. It found that systemic bias toward the victims, toward their community, toward the neighborhood they came from, had contributed to police failures. Investigations were inadequate. Warnings were ignored. The very populations most at risk received the least institutional protection. Nobody expected what came next. The report also recommended that the remaining charges against Pickton, those beyond the 6 he had been convicted on, be stayed and never retried. Those cases remain, in a legal sense, unresolved. Think about that for a moment. Remember what I said at the start, 23 confirmed victims, possibly more. Investigators recovered evidence connected to 33 women. Pickton was convicted of 6 murders, which means for the majority of women whose remains were found on that farm, there has been no formal conviction, no completed trial, no verdict. Pickton himself, in a jailhouse conversation recorded by an undercover officer, and later referenced in public court proceedings, reportedly stated a number far higher than the official count. That recording has been a matter of public record. It did not result in additional criminal charges being laid. The families of the missing women from the downtown Eastside have spent years, in some cases their entire adult lives, waiting for answers. Some are still waiting. The farm on Dominion Avenue was demolished. The land was cleared. Today it is an empty lot. The question that this case forces into the open, the one that the Opal inquiry raised and never fully resolved, is not about Robert Pickton. He was found guilty. He is in prison. The question is this: how many women might still be alive today if the first report filed in 1997 had been taken seriously? One report, one case that was stayed, one decision that was never revisited. We may never know the full answer, and that silence is the most disturbing detail of all.